Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome to another crash course. So I decided to do a crash course on NPM, or Node Package Manager, for a few reasons. One, because there's a lot of front-end developers subscribed to my channel that I think are a little intimidated by the command line and by package managers, and I want to show them how easy it is to install, remove, and update packages. And then two, I think there's a lot of people that have been using NPM for a while. They follow along with my videos and so on to install packages, but may not know, for instance, how to find where global packages are stored, or the difference between dev dependencies and regular dependencies, or how to list out their packages, things like that. Just really helpful tasks that they could be utilizing. So in this crash course, we're going to learn all about the Node Package Manager. Alright, so before we get started, let's talk a little bit about what NPM actually is. So as I said, it stands for Node Package Manager, and if you have any experience with Ruby on Rails, it's similar to Ruby Gems, or if you're a Python developer, it's similar to pip. Okay, so it's basically JavaScript's package manager. It's installed with Node.js, but don't let that fool you into thinking that you need to have experience with the Node.js runtime or Node applications to be able to use NPM. All right, you could even use NPM just for, to install Bootstrap or Foundation or some front-end framework. So it's essentially just a JavaScript package manager. All right, no Node.js skills are needed to use it. Now, when I say packages or modules, I mean the same thing. They're used interchangeably. And modules are basically just JavaScript libraries. Okay, so you can install Bootstrap as a package, jQuery, Lodash, just about every popular library or framework or script that's available is available with NPM. All right, and this makes it very easy to share and reuse code. All right, so here are some of the things that you'll learn in this little crash course. So you're going to learn how to install, remove, update, and list packages or modules. We'll look in depth at the Package.json file, which is an extremely important file when it comes to using NPM and Node applications. We'll talk about local and global packages, dependencies, dev dependencies, and the difference. All the important NPM commands and shortcuts. We'll talk a little bit about versioning and also NPM Scripts. All right, so that's what we'll be doing in this crash course, and whether you've been using NPM for years or you've never touched it, I think you'll benefit from this video. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so if you want to use NPM, you do have to have Node.js installed. It comes with Node.js. So if you don't have it installed already, just go to nodejs.org, go ahead and download it. If you're on Windows or Mac, it's a simple installer. If you're on Linux, just use whatever package manager that your distro uses. All right, now there's one other site I want to show you, and that's npmjs.com. This is basically the repository for NPM modules. So if we want to search for something like, let's say, Express, which is a web framework, and we click on Express, you'll see it'll take us to that documentation page, which resembles the GitHub page. It shows you how to install it, gives you some examples, some documentation. It even has the GitHub link over here if you click that. And that's basically, you can see it's basically the same thing. All right, so if you want to check out some modules, I think they list like the most popular ones and things like that, but you can check that site and look around if you want. But let's go ahead and get started. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new folder on my desktop, and I'm just going to call this NPM app. Okay, now we're not focusing on what we're building with this application. I just want to give you basically just an overview of how to use NPM. All right, so I'm going to open this with my text editor. I'm using Visual Studio Code. So I'm going to say open with code. Okay, you can see we have it over here on the left. And I'm also going to open it, with git bash, okay, which is the terminal program that I'm using. So I'm going to say git bash here, and we're going to just snap this over to the side, and we'll put Visual Studio on this side, and let's make this bigger. All right, now there is an integrated terminal with Visual Studio Code, but I want it over here and I want it to be bigger, so I'm not going to use the integrated terminal. Let's see, I can make this a little skinnier. Okay, so let's get into some commands, and then we're going to talk about the package.json file, and we'll go from there. Now I realize that you may be on a different environment, you may be on a Mac or Linux, you may be using a different text editor, terminal, and the only thing that you need to make sure of is that you have your folder open over here and you're in the same folder in your terminal or command line. Alright, so every command that I write in this crash course, I'm going to link a text file to in the description so that you'll have all of those commands. Alright, so first thing we're going to do is look at the version of NPM. We can do that with npm-v, and you'll see that I'm using version 5.3.0. 5.4 is released, but I was having some issues with permissions on Windows, so I decided to roll back to 5.3. Alright, so you can also check it with npm-version. Usually with these flags, you'll have a long and short version. Okay, the short will be just a letter and you use a single hyphen. The long will be the full word and you use the double hyphen. So for example, -g and -- global would be another one. Alright, now if we were to just type in NPM, what that does is it brings up the help page. If I type in NPM help, it'll do the same thing. And it just gives us a list of all the different commands. Okay, so you can see we have init, install, uninstall, all the commands that are available with NPM. Now we're definitely not going to go through all of these. In fact, a lot of these are related to actually publishing your own modules on the NPM repository, so we're not going to get into those, but we will go over the basics and the fundamentals. Alright, so let's clear this out. If you're using Git Bash, you can do Control-L and that'll just clear everything out. So next thing I want to do is talk a little bit about the Package.json file. Alright, now the Package.json file is probably the most important file in the whole Node.js JavaScript world. It's a manifest file that has all of your application info, like its name, its version, author, etc. But that's not the most important part. The most important thing is that it holds all of your application's dependencies. And what I mean by dependency is the modules that it needs to work. So if your application runs on Express, then you need to define in this file that it uses Express. Okay, you'll want it listed in the package.json so that if you deploy your app or if you move it somewhere, it knows that it needs to use Express. And not only does it list the name of the dependencies, but also the specific versions that it uses. Okay, because if it has the wrong version, then excuse me, things may break. Okay. You can also create scripts in your package.json file called NPM Scripts, and I'll get into that later. Now you could manually create this file, but that would be kind of a waste of time because we have a very simple command called npm init, which will actually create the file for us. Alright, so let's get back to our terminal and let's run npm init. Alright, so back in Git Bash or whatever you're using for your terminal, let's go ahead and say npm init. Now before you run it, make sure that you're in your actual application folder. Okay, I called mine npm app. So make sure you're in that, and then we're going to run it. And basically it's going to take us through and it's going to ask us some questions. So the default answer is going to be in these parentheses, and if you're happy with that answer, then you can just click enter. So npm app is good, but if we wanted to, we could name it something else, but that's good, so I'm just going to hit enter. Version, it's going to be 1.0.0, that's good, and I'm going to go through the semantic versioning schema later as well. Description, so if you wanted to put something here, we'll just say simple sample app. Entry point, this is basically the main JavaScript file. Sometimes you'll see app.js or server.js. We'll just keep the default of index.js. Test command, we don't need to worry about that. We don't have a Git repository. Keywords, you can put specific keywords if you want. Author, you can put your name or skip it, whatever. License, the default is ISC. I usually use MIT, and it's going to ask if everything's okay, and then you just click enter. And now if you look over in our file structure, we have a package.json file, and it has all of the stuff that we just answered. Now we're going to stick to this npm init command for a few minutes. I want to talk about it a little more. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just delete the package.json file that was just created. And I'm going to show you how we can, let's clear this out. I'm going to show you how we can run npm init without having to go through all those questions. So to do that, we can say npm init, and we can either do -y or we can do --yes. And what that's going to do is it's just going to accept all of those answers for us. Okay, it's going to accept the defaults. So let's run it. and you'll see that we didn't have to answer any questions, and it just created the package.json. All right, now you might be asking, well, you know, what if I want to add my name or change the license or something like that? We can actually change the defaults for our package.json file. All right, so let me show you how to do that. So I'm going to just go over here and clear this out, and we're going to run npm config set. Okay, and then we're going to decide what we want to set. So I want to change the author name to be my name by default. So to do that, we're going to say set init dash author dash name, and then we're going to put inside quotes here whatever you want. Okay, so I'm just going to put my own name, and I'm going to hit enter. All right, so it doesn't give us any response or anything back, but it does in fact change the default for the author. All right, let's say we want to change the license to be MIT. So we can say npm. Now, again, you can say config set, but when you're setting, you actually don't even need to include the word config. You can just say npm set, and then we'll say init dash license, and we'll set that, we'll set that to MIT, and we'll run that. So now, again, let's go ahead and say npm init. Well, let's first delete this package.json file. Okay, and then we're going to run npm init, and I'm just going to do a -y here to accept all the defaults, and let's click enter. All right, and now if we look at our package.json, you'll see that my name is there for the author, and we have MIT for the license. Okay, so we changed the defaults for those options. Now, if you ever want to check what there is for a default from your command line, you can do that as well. So we can do that with npm get, and let's say we wanted to check the author, so we can say npm get init dash author dash name, and you'll see we get Brad Traversy. Okay, and I'm emitting the config. You can also do config get, and that'll get it as well. So what if we want to remove defaults? Okay, so basically just, you know, go back to what it was in the beginning. So for that, we can say npm config delete, and we're going to say, let's do delete init dash author dash name. Okay, and then we'll do the same thing for the license. So we'll say npm config delete init license, and let's go ahead and delete our package.json file, and let's run npm init -y and check it out again, and now you'll see that the license is back to the default of ISC, and then author is blank. All right, so that's how you can set defaults, check them, and delete them. So we're going to clear that out, and now we're going to install a module. So the module I'm going to install is called Lodash, and I'm sure a lot of you know what that is. It's basically a JavaScript library that gives you a bunch of utility functions that can do things like sort arrays, loop through arrays, set timeouts and delays, just all different things to do with JavaScript, and it makes it a lot easier than to just write it out with vanilla JavaScript. So we're going to install that. So we're going to go over here and say npm install Lodash. Now there's one very important flag that we need here, and that's --save. And what that does is it saves it to our package.json as a dependency. Okay, so that's basically the most important part of this file. And if we don't use --save, it will get installed. It'll create a node modules folder and install it, but it won't get added to this file. So we want to make sure that we have that flag. So let's go ahead and run that. And what it did is it did two things. It first of all added this dependencies object, and it added Lodash, and it also has the version. I'm going to go over this in a little bit and what this symbol here means and all that. And then it also created a node modules folder, and it put the Lodash module inside there. All right, so now we have Lodash installed. So let's go ahead and create, whoops, I didn't want to close that. Let's create our entry point, which is going to be this index.js file. Okay, so in the root, we'll say new file, index.js. And what I'm going to do here is just basically create a very, very simple application that's just going to loop through an array and output it into the console. And the contents of this application and what it does not matter at all. It's just an example so you can see how modules work. So we're going to create a variable. I'm going to just call it an underscore. That's the convention for Lodash. Lodash meaning an underscore. And we're going to set that to require. Okay, so whenever you install a module and you want to use it inside your application, you just want to set a variable and set it to require, and then whatever the name is. So in this case, Lodash. All right. So now what I'm going to do is just create a simple variable called numbers. Okay, we'll just set this to, I don't know, just some random numbers. All right. So we have some numbers. Now we want to loop through it, and I'm going to do that using the each function that's available with Lodash. So we can say underscore dot each. And I could have called this anything. I could have called this LD and then said LD dot each. I could have did that, but the convention is to use an actual underscore. So each is going to take in the actual array, so numbers, and then it's also going to take a function. All right, and then this function here is going to take in an iterator. We're just going to call it number, and then also an index, okay, which will be just, it'll start at 0, and then each iteration it'll go 1, 2, 3, and so on. But all we want to do here is console log the number. Okay. And that's it. That's our application. So we can run this in our console by just saying node and then the name of the file, which is index.js. We could also do just index. And there we go. So it outputs all of the numbers in the array. So you can pretend that this is some big application. It doesn't really matter as far as what we're using it for. We're just using it to talk about modules in NPM. All right, now I want to give you an example of why it's important to use the save flag and add it to your package.json. All right, so let's say that we're happy with this application. We want to push it to a Git repository for other people to grab it and use it. Now, when you push to a Git repository or you move your file somewhere, you don't want to include the node modules folder, because this is just a third-party module, and it's just, you don't want to clog up your application with, I mean, you could have a ton of stuff in here, so you just want to list them in your package.json file, and then you'll just take your your app files and then the package.json file. You'll leave the node modules. Okay, a lot of times you'll create a git ignore file and you'll add node modules to it so it knows not to push that up to the repository. All right. So let's say someone takes it from your repository, they clone it or they pull it down or whatever. We'll just call this, we'll say we'll just call it my app. All right, so we're going to go ahead and we're going to take our index.js and our package.json. We don't want the node modules. And we're going to paste that over here. And then I'm going to open up another terminal in my app, in the new application that we just pulled down. So let's open up a git bash, and all we have to do now, if we try to run it as is, if we say node index, we're going to get can't find module Lodash because we have no node modules folder with Lodash in it. So what we have to do is just run npm install. Okay, nothing else, just npm install. And what that does is it looks at the package.json dependencies and it installs anything that's inside of that. Okay, so let's run that. Remember, this is the my app. This isn't our initial application. Okay, so it says added one package, and let's take a look at my app. And now there's a node modules folder with Lodash. Okay, so now if we go back and we say node index, our application works. Okay, now let's do the same thing. Okay, we're going to delete everything in the second folder in my app. And let's go into our original app in Visual Studio Code and just remove the dependencies right here. Okay, let's say we just did npm install Lodash without the save. And then we'll take our two files again, bring them over. Okay, and then we'll open up git bash in the second one. And we'll say npm install. And you see that it doesn't say any packages have been installed because it doesn't see any. There's nothing in dependencies. So if we now try to run node index, it can't find Lodash because it was never installed. So that's why it's very important to make sure that you save your dependencies. All right. I know that was kind of a side tangent, but I just wanted to show you why that's so important. So let's go ahead and put that back and save. All right, now you also have something called dev dependencies, and you want to install something as a dev dependency if it's only going to be used for development. Okay, you're not going to need it in production. And one example that I can think of for this would be like gulp, which is a task runner used to do things like minify your JavaScript, compile Sass files, things that you do in development. So let's go ahead and install a dev dependency. I'm going to clear this out. I'm going to say npm install, and I'm going to install gulp. And then also gulp has a bunch of different plugins. I'm going to install the gulp-sass plugin. All right, because you can do this. You can install more than one module with one command. But now at the end, I'm going to say --save-dev. Okay, and by the way, you can put this at the end or you can put it in the beginning like this, --save or --save-dev. You can do it like that as well. But let's go ahead and run that. And that's going to install both of these. All right. So notice that it didn't get these two modules, they didn't get put in dependencies, they got put in their own object called dev dependencies. Okay. And then we have gulp and gulp sass, and they did get added to the node modules if I reload this. Now also notice that there is now a ton of shit in this node modules folder. The reason for that is because gulp has a ton of its own dependencies. So the node modules folder isn't only going to be your dependencies. It's not going to be just this stuff. It's going to be any dependencies that any of these have. So this gets huge, and you can see why you don't want to package your application with this folder. Okay, because it gets humongous depending on how big your application is and how much, you know, development tools you have running and stuff like that. Okay, now with dev dependencies, I'm just going to kind of do the same thing here and create a new folder called my app. And I'm going to bring over these two files. And then let's open up my app with git bash or whatever terminal you're using. And if we say npm install, it's going to install all of our regular dependencies plus the dev dependencies. Okay, so both of those. But if we want to apply --production, if we apply this flag, what it's going to do is it's only going to install the regular dependencies. You can see added one package. And if we go into my app, and let's take a look at, we'll just look in node modules, no gulp, okay? No gulp or any of the other dependencies. If we were to just run, let's actually delete the node modules. And we'll run it without the --production. And you can already see that it's different. It's adding gulp, it's adding all of those other dependencies. And you may get warnings and stuff if some of the other dependencies are a little, you know, out of date or something, if something's deprecated or whatever. And now if we look in there, we have all of that stuff. Okay, so that's one of the differences between dev dependencies is you can add that production flag and it's not going to install that stuff. All right, so let's get back to Visual Studio Code. And now we're going to go over uninstalling or removing dependencies. So let's clear this out. All right, when I say dependencies, modules, dependencies, packages, all the same thing. So let's say that we don't want to use this gulp sass or gulp anymore. So all we have to do is say npm uninstall gulp, or let's do gulp sass. And since it's a dev dependency, we also want to include that flag again. All right, because that's going to remove it from here as well as delete it. So let's go ahead and run that. All right, so now you can see that that's gone. It's also been deleted. So there's also some aliases for uninstall. So let's get rid of gulp now, and we're going to use remove. Okay, so we can use uninstall or remove. You can also use just rm or un. Okay, any of those, they're all going to do the same thing. So let's say remove gulp, and let's say -- save -dev. And that removes gulp. All right, now you can also install certain versions of modules. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to remove Lodash for a second. I'm going to say npm, let's use rm this time, and we'll say Lodash. It's a regular dependency, so I'm going to say -- save. So now that's removed. If we look in node modules and we just reload this, you'll see that there's nothing in there except just the .bin. So let's say that we want to install an earlier version. I think the latest version was, 1 second. We should have looked before I had installed it, but the latest version is 4.17.4. So let's say we want to install 4.17.3. What we can do is we can say npm install Lodash, and we can do at 4.17.3 -- save. And there we go. So now you can see that we have 4.17.3. All right, so let's say that we want to update to the latest version. We could simply go npm update Lodash. And there we go. You can see that the 3 changed to a 4. Okay, so it's as easy as that to update. It's as easy as that to install, remove, update. You know, it's very easy, very simple commands. Like I said, I'm going to attach a text file. It's going to have all this stuff for you. You guys can put it somewhere, and you can kind of keep it as like a little cheat sheet. All right, so let's stop for a second and let's talk about these version numbers. Now, when we install a package or a module and we look inside the package.json at the version numbers, they're always in this format. So we have three numbers separated by dots in between. So basically, each of these has a meaning. So this last one here, this is the patch version. All right, so what that means is that this is when there's some kind of bug, when there's something wrong and they fix it, or a couple bugs and they fix them, they're going to increase this. Okay, so this number gets increased. Now, this isn't going to break anything in your application. Okay, if you upgrade to the next patch version, it's not going to break anything. It's going to fix some issues. At least if the application is created by good developers. All right, so that's called the patch version. Next, we have the minor version, okay, which is the middle one. So for the minor version, they may add some new features, okay? So maybe there's some new features to the application, but it's not going to break your application, okay? Your syntax should be safe, okay? So you should be able to upgrade that version without having to have any worries. Now, the major version, which is this number, this applies breaking changes. Okay, so if you have your application and you upgrade to, let's say from Express version 3 dot whatever to version 4 dot whatever, your application is probably going to break, and you're going to have to go in, you're going to have to look at the new documentation and then upgrade your application. You're going to have to upgrade your syntax to match the new version. So that's what these 3 numbers are. So let's go back into Visual Studio Code, and we're going to talk about the little symbols. All right, so let's take a look at our package.json, and let's look at our Lodash dependency. And we have our version number, but before that, we have this caret symbol. So what this signifies is that when we go and we move this, or we push it to a repo and someone clones it and they run npm install, it's going to install the latest minor version. Okay, so if there's been an update and there's now Lodash 4.18.0 or something like that, and they run npm install, that's what's going to get installed, is that latest minor version. All right, now if Lodash has actually changed to 5 as the major version, it will not install 5. Okay, it's not going to install the latest major version even if there's been an update. It'll stick to 4, it'll just be the latest version of 4, okay, the latest minor version. Now, if we were to put a tilde here like that, what that's going to do is it's going to say to keep this minor version and only update the patch version. Okay, so go to the latest patch version. Okay, now if you take this off completely like that, it's going to install this exact version no matter what. Even if there's a new patch version, it'll always stick to this exact version. Now, if you want to just completely replace this with an asterisk like that, what that says is install the absolute latest version. So even if there's a Lodash 5, then go ahead and install that. And that's usually not a good idea because, like I said, the major version, there's usually breaking changes. And if you do this and they pull down your application and they do npm install, then there may be some issues and it may not even run. Okay, so that's why when you do npm install Lodash, the default is to just keep the minor version to update. Now, when this can get a little tricky is when you're working with alpha versions of applications, alphas and betas, and those of you that have taken my Bootstrap 4 course on Udemy know that. I had some real issues with that. So what I had to do is go back, and when we built the starter pack, I had to have you guys remove this so it installed the exact version, okay? So it can get a little tricky and it can get a little aggravating, especially if you're creating courses like I did. But just know that that's what these little symbols mean. All right, hopefully I explained that all right. So let's go ahead and just make sure that this is saved. All right, so next thing I want to move to is global modules, because up to this point we've only installed local modules, meaning that they're just going in the node modules folder. Let me just reload that. All right, so a good example of a global module would be something like NodeMon. NodeMon is a module that can continuously watch your application so that you don't have to keep restarting it every time you edit it. So every time you save, it'll watch it, it'll restart it, and that's something that I like to install globally most of the time. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's go over here and let's say npm install, and we're going to add the -g flag for global, and then we're going to say NodeMon. All right, and since this is global, it's not going to go inside of our node modules folder. It's not going to go inside of our package.json. It's being installed on our actual machine. Now, if you want to know where this is being installed, there's actually a command that can show you where your global modules go, and that's npm root -g. And you can see that mine on Windows, it's going to go to your users folder, app data, roaming, and then node modules. So let's actually check that out. So we'll go to, let's see, I want to go to our users, Brad, and let's go to app data. Where is it? You'll have to show hidden files as well. And then let's see, roaming, npm, and there it is, NodeMon. So anything you install globally is going to show up here, okay, or whatever this folder is. Okay, if you're on a Mac or Linux, obviously it's going to be a different type of location. Now, since we installed NodeMon, we can run it from anywhere, okay, but generally you want to run it inside of an application directory. So let's see what happens if we run it. Okay, so what it did is it ran our application and it's continuously watching it. So if we go over to index.js and we just change something, like let's change this to a 31, and we'll save, it watches it and then it reloads it and runs it again. And this is great if you're working with like Express and you're working with a web server, so that every change you make, you don't have to go and restart your server. You can just run NodeMon, it'll watch it, and then you can just go and, you know, reload your browser and your application will upload. All right, or reload, I should say. Another good module for installing globally is like a server type module. I like to use live server, so I'm just gonna stop the NodeMon with Control-C, and let's go ahead and say npm install live-server-g. And then what that does is it'll allow you to run whatever directory you're in on your local host, and it'll load it up in your browser. All right, so let's go ahead and run live server, and it just opens it up. I don't have any index.html file in my folder. If I did, it would load. In fact, I guess I can do that real quick just to show you. If we say index.html, and we'll just put an h1 here and save, and there we go. All right, so it gives us this little server, which is nice. And we can go, we can stop that with Control-C. All right, now if you want to remove a global module, so let's see, if we go back to that NPM folder, you'll see that now I have live server there. If you want to remove this, you do it the same way. We can do npm remove or uninstall. Just make sure you add the -g flag, and then let's remove nodemon. And then that should go away. Okay, so you can see that nodemon has now disappeared. All right, so let's see what else. I know this is getting long, but I'm trying to cover as much as I can. If you want to list the packages in your project, you can use list. So if we say npm list, you'll see that we just have Lodash. Now, I'm actually going to install gulp again, just so I can show you something. So I'm going to say npm install gulp, and I'll just add it as a regular dependency. Okay, so now if I say npm list, you'll see that it's going to list everything, okay, including all of the dependencies of gulp. So let's say we just want to list the top level. What we can do is we can say npm list, and we can add the depth flag, so --depth, and we can set that to 0. And then you could see it's only going to show us gulp and Lodash. All right, if we want to change the depth to 1, it'll show us just the dependencies of gulp, okay? But a lot of the dependencies of gulp have more dependencies, and that can be another level. So if we say 2, you'll see that it gets bigger. So if you just do npm list, it'll show all of the dependencies of all the modules. All right, now I'm just going to remove gulp real quick. So let's say npm remove gulp, and I added that as a regular dependency. All right. So the last thing I want to do is talk about scripts. Okay, so if we look in our package.json, we have a scripts object, and by default they give you this test. This is if you want to install something like Mocha, some kind of testing framework, and you want to be able to say npm test. Now a lot of the times you'll see a start script. So we're not going to use test. I'm just going to change it to start. And then what you would do is put in the command to start your application, which in our case is what? Node index.js, right? So we would say node, either index or index.js, doesn't matter. And then save, and then we can go over here and say npm start, and that runs our application. Now, there's a few reasons to do this. One is because if someone has your application, they may not know, or they may not want to look and see what your main file is. They don't want to go in here and see, oh, the main file is index.js, because it could be something else. It could be app.js or server.js. So npm start gives them just an easy way to start it up without even have to look. Another reason would be you might change this. Okay, so you may change index.js, like let's rename it to app.js, and we'll go ahead and change the main here to app.js, and then we can start this up with node app. Since we changed the name, node index no longer works. So what we would do is just update our start script like that, not like that, app.js, and then they can say npm start, and that works. All right. Another reason is if you deploy to, like, let's say Heroku or something like that, some kind of platform, a lot of times they'll look at the start script to see what file is actually going to need to be run. So that's another reason. But start isn't. I mean, you can add any script you want. Like, let's say we want, instead of having to do live server globally, let's say we want to install it locally and then create a script for it. So what I'll do is I'll say NPM. Actually, first of all, I'm going to remove it from the global area. So let's say remove live server -g. All right, and then we'll install it locally. So we'll say npm install. Usually this will be a dev dependency, so we'll say save dev. Whoops. Save dev. Live server. All right, and you can see that that got added, and then we may want to create a script. Like, let's say we'll call it just server, and we'll want it to run live server. So we'll save that, go over here, and now we can say npm run server, and it'll open it up for us. All right, so that's an example of a very simple npm script. Notice that I did run. I didn't do, if we say npm server, that's not going to work. When we create a script, unless it's start or test, or I think there's some other ones, then you have to do run. Okay, so no matter what you put here, we could call this dev if we wanted to. And then we could go over here and we could say npm run dev. And that'll start up live server. All right, so I think that's going to be it, guys. I hope that you learned something here, whether you've never touched NPM before, or if you've been using it for a while, or if you know all this and you just wanted to watch it as a refresher. That's fine. So that's it. Thanks for watching, guys, and I will see you in the next video.